On this edition of Independent Sources, Young and Poor, why is the city's childhood poverty rate above the national average and unchanged in 10 years?
There is a direct correlation between educational attainment levels and income levels and income earning capacity.
And Project Lives, offering a positive perspective on life in the city's public housing developments.
So it's not an outsider taking pictures and projecting their own point of view onto those who live in public housing. It's the actual residents going and taking pictures of what's important to them.
Those stories and more coming up on Independent Sources. Welcome to Independent Sources, bringing you news from New York's ethnic and immigrant communities. I'm Zyphus Lebrun. A recent study published by the Center for Latin American, Caribbean, and Latino Studies and the City University's Graduate Center reveals that New York City's childhood poverty rates are higher than the national average. What's more concerning is that this statistic has not changed in the last 10 years. Pierre-Pierre spoke with one of the authors of the study, Professor Laird Bergad, about some of the findings.
Dr. Bergad, why did the poverty rate among children go up?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. One of the things that we can highlight is that poverty rates in New York City among children have remained relatively stagnant between 1990 and 2010. They've hovered around 35%. Now, we are talking about children 14 years of age and under. And I think that's important to take note of because most poverty studies look at children 18 years of under. We decided to look at it a little bit different.
Why?
Because we feel that this is the most vulnerable sector of young people in our society, and so we decided to focus on this age group. If you look at 1 to 18-year-olds, the poverty rate is not so high. So one thing to take note of in the report that my center published is that we have the stagnation in poverty rates. It does not decline, does not increase significantly. A second factor I think to take note of is that it is significantly higher than the national poverty rate. The national poverty rate has also not declined significantly since 1990, but hovers around 20-some% if we look at 1 to 14-year-olds. Now, you ask why? Why has it not declined? In the case of New York City, I think that one factor we can look at is the overall inequitable distribution of wealth, which has certainly been highlighted by the media over the last several years. Wealth distribution is becoming worse in the United States and in New York City, not better. That is, the upper 1% or upper 5% or upper 10% of the population, irrespective of race, controls an extraordinary share of the overall wealth. Poorer people are seeing that the share of their overall wealth decline. I think that's, so this is one factor, that poverty is a function of this inequitable distribution of wealth that we find being exacerbated really since the 1980s and the Reagan era. I think another factor is particular to New York City. As you well know, and as all New Yorkers well know, New York is a city of immigrants, and that there is a constant arrival of new people and a constant mobility. New Yorkers are very mobile. People are arriving, people are leaving. This has been going on since the 19th century. It's not something new. And so a fundamental question which is not answered really in this report is this maintenance of child poverty a function of what we can refer to as a selection process? That is, people who make it, people who have more acquisitive power, who have higher incomes, tend to leave the city for the suburbs, seeking cheaper living spaces, more living space at a less price, better educational opportunities for their kids. So it may be that this maintenance of high levels of childhood poverty is a reflection of this ongoing immigration process. That is, foreigners arrive who sometimes have less skills, lower income earning capabilities, while more affluent New Yorkers tend to leave the city.
But the children,
right,
they're not working.
Right.
They're not working age. We have laws against that. Right. So basically what, and tell me if I'm wrong, what we're talking about is their parents being poor and by default they're poor.
Right, precisely.
Okay.
That's the way the Census Bureau, which are the data from which we derive these analytical tables, come from.
Okay. And the Latino population, it has the highest rate. Why?
Well, again, this may be a function of, for example, the large-scale arrival of recent migrants. Let me give you a case in point: Mexicans. Yes. Mexicans are a sector of the New York City population, or the New York City Latino population that has grown the most rapid in the last 20 years. And what we find is that there's a predominance of foreign-born Mexicans with low levels of educational attainment and thus low incomes, as there is a close correlation. So one reason that the Latino population demonstrates these very high rates of childhood poverty is the ongoing arrival of Mexicans, of Dominicans, of Ecuadorians, and other groups. Now, that doesn't tell the whole story, because one of the characteristics if we look at the different nationalities or national subgroups within the Latino population, Puerto Ricans continue to have the highest poverty rate, and Puerto Ricans are not arriving in any significant numbers.
And plus, they are American.
They're American citizens. They've been here the longest, having begun to arrive in significant numbers in the 1940s and 1950s. And yet the childhood poverty rate among Puerto Ricans is higher than among Dominicans or Mexicans or Ecuadorians or Colombians, which are the 5 largest groups. And it hovers around 51%.
That's pretty high. And so what should the policy be to address this issue? What do we need to do as a city to deal with this serious problem?
I wish I was a politician and I could answer your question.
Well,
I don't have an answer.
To give them recommendation how to tackle the issue.
I think one thing is for certain. There is a direct correlation between educational attainment levels and income levels and income earning capacity. And so one clear thing that ought to be done is to encourage the construction of better schools, the hiring of better teachers, devoting more resources to the public education system. And I think that Mayor de Blasio's initiative to make pre-K universal is a start. And the question is, what has happened to that? What has happened to the funding for that? Is there willpower on the part of state and city officials to really make the kinds of improvements that are needed? There's no panacea for this. There's no overarching solution to this. I can't tell you that let's take from the rich and give to the poor, or let's invoke all kinds of redistributive policies, but education certainly is a place to start. In pre-K, it's been proven by many empirical studies that kids who are involved in pre-K have a better shot at going through the educational system with successful outcomes. So education, I think, is one thing that resources have to be devoted to.
How much do you think the fact that the last 20 years we've had a series of Republican mayors have contributed to this?
I think that the problem transcends any political party. I think that going back to what my original observation that I made was that the distribution of income has grown worse under Republican presidents, I'm moving to the national level, and Democratic presidents. Clinton didn't do much to improve the deteriorating income distribution profile of the United States if we compare him to Reagan's presidency or the first Bush's presidency. So I see that this is a long-term process, and that I wouldn't pin the blame on any one political party. The guilt is can be distributed pretty widely. After all, the state of New York, from which a great deal of funding to New York City comes from, has been controlled by Democrats for some time, as is the state legislature. So I don't see this as a political party issue, but rather a political will issue, policies issue. And I think both parties are equally guilty for not recognizing this. There's a big problem that you have here in terms of economic development that politicians look at. We know, it's well known, that high taxes discourage business investment. Yet high taxes are a way to generate funds for the improvement of educational facilities. And so you're caught between a rock and a hard spot here. if taxes are raised to fund social programs, businesses tend to leave, and that's going to result in some sort of long-term, I think, economic problem. Now, that doesn't mean that tax monies expenditures are allocated in some sort of just way.
Exactly.
That's another series of
It's basically
problems.
whoever has the most power wins.
Well, whoever has the most influence and power in an informal and formal way tends to extract the most resources from the political system.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. Dr. Burgad, thanks for joining us. Thanks for a really good study. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
When we come back, a look at public housing through the eyes of its inhabitants. The city's low and medium income housing has taken on a life of its own. They were once an example to the rest of the country and a beacon of hope for residents seeking social mobility. Now, these projects, as they're often called, have been immortalized and sometimes glorified in song and film as a wasteland of death and a breeding ground for drugs and gun violence. The photo book Project Lives hopes to change that perspective by showing these buildings through residents' eyes. Abby Shola spoke with one of the book's editors, Chelsea Davis.
Welcome, Chelsea.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Can you talk a little bit about Project Lives, the photography book, and the project overall and how it got started?
Sure, absolutely. Well, me and George Carano and Jonathan Fisher are all editors in the Project Lives photography book. And the idea for the program and then for the book as well was to provide an alternate viewpoint to the really negative portrayal of public housing in New York. So we all came together. The initial concept was George's idea, and he pitched the idea to the Housing Authority. And together we implemented a program that taught photography to the residents of public housing.
And I understand you worked with young people and seniors?
Yeah, absolutely. The program was offered at community centers across the city. We piloted in Harlem. But we offer the program for anyone who's willing to participate. And so in community centers, that usually means kids and seniors, because those are who's...
Attending community centers?
No, exactly. That's who's available to participate, because the adults are at work during the day.
Yeah, that's true. So how many people in total participated in the program?
Well, we piloted with only 12 in Harlem. But by the time, years later, when the program ended, we had over 200 participants.
Wow. And the photos are stunning. I looked through the book today and I was amazed by especially some of the children. What were some of the things you told them in terms of advice on how to take photos and what to look for?
So the workshops were 12 classes in total, so they ran for 12 weeks long. And each workshop was an hour-long class, and that was divided between a half an hour of like a lecture-style instruction. So we talked a little bit about photography technique, such as like light and shadow, or camera language, or composition. And we talked a little bit about the history of photography and offered some inspirational photographers. And then the latter half was the photographers sharing their own work. So we sat around and the classes offered critique on the photography, and each photographer shared their stories, and then everyone wrote captions to accompany their photographs.
Wow. So how long did it take to get this body of work?
So this started in 2010 with, again, just the 12 participants in Harlem. And just due to popular demand, we expanded all over the city. We ended up in 6 different locations citywide, offering classes to residents of 16 different public housing developments. And the last workshop was offered in 2014.
Wow. Have there been any success stories of people that have fallen in love with photography?
Oh, so many. I mean, between the kids who now want to be professional photographers or photojournalists,
wow.
Several of the little girls came up to me saying that they wanted to be photography teachers. We had seniors who said, they were never really comfortable using a camera, but the class gave them the confidence to go out and feel like a photographer and better document family moments and things that were important to them going forward.
Okay, and why was it so important for you guys to show the projects in a different light?
Well, I just think that the public perception isn't fair to those who live in public housing. There are 635,000 people living in public housing in New York, and that's a number that's comparable in scale to the population of Boston. It's a lot of people.
Wow.
And yet, the public perception is really negative. And there's this other side to the story that just deserves to be told.
And you as a photographer yourself, why did you know that, doing photos or having them take photos would change their perception or change people's perception?
I just think having that opportunity to create a really authentic lens into that life. So it's not an outsider taking pictures and projecting their own point of view onto those who live in public housing. It's the actual residents going and taking pictures of what's important to them and defining their own image.
So what has the response been to the book so far?
It's just been really positively received by everyone. I think it's really exciting for our participants to have their photographs published and their stories shared, but everyone that we've shared it with have been really excited about the photography effort and just having these stories told.
Did you think that the response would have been so positive when you decided to make the book?
Absolutely. I think the type of project people can really stand behind. I don't think it's a struggle for people to accept that there is another story of life in public housing. I just don't think it's as readily available as the negative coverage. One thing that I do think is surprising is that out of all of the tens of thousands of photos that were taken in the program, all of our photography is really optimistic. So I think that was surprising to some.
Okay, and where can people purchase the book?
Everywhere, really. So Powerhouse.
Widely published.
Yeah, well, Powerhouse, our publisher, you could be purchased through them. Also, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart, and many local bookstores throughout New York have picked it up as well.
Very nice. And then the proceeds go where?
Editors' royalties go back to the New York City Housing Authority.
That's amazing. Well, Chelsea Davis, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Still to come on the show, a Brazilian artist who's trying to preserve history. Finally from us, Sonya Guggisberg is a multimedia artist whose work explores urban and environmental themes. Her latest project, called Crossing Images, is a multi-channel video installation. I spoke to Guggisberg about her effort to preserve history through her work. Sonya, thank you for joining us in studio today.
Thanks for inviting me to have this interview.
All right. So let's just start a little bit with your work itself. Your work very much focuses on urban environments and so forth. Why did you decide to go in that direction?
Some years ago, I decided to study about the water and the water inside the subsoil. So I started working with the hidden big oceans that we have under the subsoil, under the big countries like Brazil. We have some of them. But I lived in that urban space. So after doing this research about the water, I decided to change my research to inside the city, to the urban space. And my first work there was about the underground that we have in São Paulo. Mm-hmm. I did a documentary about this because we have a very big hidden history under our biggest avenue. It's Avenida Paulista, mm-hmm. and like the Fifth Avenue for you, yeah. It's the bigger symbol of the city, and it's a big city. And so I started with this documentary. and this research. And after that, I started thinking about the redrawing movements that we have in the city. Because São Paulo is a city that if you stop going to some part of the city and you go after some years, you will see that everything changed.
Now, so now when you say the redrawing movement, what do you mean by that for the audience?
Yeah, because it's common. Now they are preserving some parts, but it was common to destroy the old buildings. And when you destroy the old buildings, you destroy part of the history and a part of the identity of the people who live there.
Mm-hmm. So are there no laws that, like here in the United States, there are laws that help preserve historical landmarks and so forth. So there are no laws that exist like that in Brazil? Is that the case?
Yes, we have the laws, and they are very hard. But you know how is the capitalism. When the people want to put something down, they will do at night, on the weekend, I don't know. They will find a way to do the thing. Mm-hmm. So our Avenida Paulista, we had a very big old houses there, and we don't have, I think we have only 2 now. Mm-hmm. But it's the 3 kilometers of big houses that we had. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And now they are only buildings, big buildings.
Mm-hmm. Now, is your work considered to be anti-establishment, or is your work considered to be, in a way, kind of railing against this sort of redrawing movement that seems to be happening?
It's a kind of political artwork, because I always think about the things in relation with the people, in relation with the movement of the city, and in relation with the society that lives there. Mm-hmm. So it's a kind of political, because I'm thinking about the movement, and I think we need to think about we have to live in a faster movement more and more and more. So it's difficult to explain you, but I think the technological, when we had the technological concept in our lives, in our way of living, we had to do everything fast as a machine, as on a computer. So if some years ago we could wait for the letter and send the letter, now in kind of minutes you have 100 emails to answer. So you have to think about 100 different things. Right. And you have to improve different things. So it's. I think we lose a part of our human way of living, and we had to be faster.
Right. Right. Because that's what your current exhibit that's going on here in the city is all about. This whole idea of living faster, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about it. It's called. It's called Crossing Images, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have already, I did my PhD, I finished my PhD last year. And it was about the idea of subsoil. Mm-hmm. And then the subsoil, like an underground, but not underground, the subsoil and the underground, the both ideas. And I started thinking about the hidden histories and the movements that make the society changing inside the societies. So about the fast movements, the crossing images, it's to relate the movement that the city, that non-stop city that we live in, a non-stop city, 24 hours. If you have to work all the time, okay, and you have to think. In different ways all the time. It's not only one direction, you have many directions. Right. So it's a kind of, the crossed images is something like that. I started capturing images inside trains, and when I put my camera outside and the train comes inside the tunnel, it changes at the same moment to inside. Right. It's a movement that the camera do. Right. So I started thinking about this, because I have the reflex, and I have the image outside and inside, with the people inside and the people outside. And I think it's a movement that we have all day. Right. That we have to think and change, think and do all the time. Right. It's an inside-outside movement.
Right, like you're constantly changing your perspective. You constantly.
Yes, yes. Yeah. So it's a kind of that you don't think about this anymore. So it's so fast. Right. And I don't know. I like the idea, but I think we are living as a machine sometimes.
Well, Sonya, thank you very, very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure. Thanks.
Right. The exhibit will run at Media Noche Gallery. That, full disclosure, is curated by one of our producers, Judith Escalona. That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned. Till next time, be independent-minded.